All right, the Trump administration, they've been working hard now. They've been working for months trying to clean up the total mess Joe Biden left behind all around the world. And one man at the center of all these efforts has been the special envoy, Steve Witkoff. In recent days, he met with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and the Iranian foreign minister, as President Trump is now working to bring the Russian invasion of Ukraine to an end and bring peace to Europe and prevent Iran from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon. Not exactly the easiest meeting schedule in the entire world. So what is it like to be involved in high-stakes negotiations? Well, we asked the man himself, White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. A lot of people are skeptical, Steve, good to see you, by the way, on both fronts here. Is there, with Putin, a deal emerging? Or is he trying to buy time, knowing that Putin sees a window of opportunity without hundreds of billions of U.S. dollars in weaponry, giving him a military advantage? Do you really see a deal emerging? Are you confident?
I think you used a very good word there, Sean, emerging. I do. This is the third meeting I've had with him. This last meeting lasted close to 5 hours. We had two of his key advisors in the room at the time, Ushakov and Kirill Dmitriev. And it was a compelling meeting. And towards the end, we actually came up with, and I'm going to say finally, but I don't mean it in the way that we were waiting. I mean it in the way that it took a while for us to get to this place. What Putin's request is to have a permanent peace here. So beyond a ceasefire, we got an answer to that.
Okay, and will the deal include things that maybe are out of the box that people aren't thinking about now? I would imagine Vladimir Putin probably would want to be in business with the U.S. and with Europe. Is that a potential that could come out of this?
There's no doubt about it. I mean, this peace deal is about these so-called 5 territories, but there's so much more to it. There's security protocols. There's no NATO, Article 5. I mean, it's just, a lot of detail attached to it. It's a complicated situation, rooted in some real problematic things happening between the two countries. And I think we might be on the verge of something that would be very, very important for the world at large. On top of that, I believe there's a possibility to reshape the Russian-United States relationship through some very compelling commercial opportunities that I think give real stability to the region, too. Partnerships create stability.
Well, you know what? Money solves a lot of problems, Steve. You've been a successful businessman your whole career. Let me go to Iran, if I may, and meeting face-to-face with the Iranian foreign minister, the first known contact with the U.S. and Iran since the president took office. Same question, but a different context. Are the Iranians trying to buy time? My understanding and public disclosures have them at, and the IAEA report, about 60% enrichment. To get from 60 to 90%, which is weapon grade enrichment, is a very short period of time. Then they would need a delivery system. So my question is this. Both you and the president have been very adamant that the Iranians cannot get a bomb. I agree with both of you. I'm skeptical, like a lot of other people. How do you have a conversation with people that believe in a caliphate, convert or die, and, the notion that they've got to wipe Israel and the U.S. off the map? I don't know if it's ever going to be possible to get a deal with people that have that ideology and mindset. How'd it go?
Well, Sean, the president's message of peace through strength, it resonates throughout the world. This is not a threat on my part now. It is just a simple fact. The president means what he says, which is they cannot have a bomb. The conversation with the Iranians will be much about 2 critical points. One, enrichment. as you mentioned, they do not need to enrich past 3.67%. In some circumstances, they're at 60%. In other circumstances, 20%. That cannot be. And you do not need to run, as they claim, a civil nuclear program where you're enriching past 3.67%. So this is going to be much about verification on the enrichment program, and then ultimately verification on weaponization. That includes missiles, the type of missiles that they have stockpiled there, and it includes the trigger for a bomb. And I think we're here to have, as the president indicated, and I take my direction from him every day that I go to work, we're here to see if we can solve this situation diplomatically and with dialogue. The first meeting was positive, constructive, compelling.
Mm-hmm. I'm a trust but verify guy. Would it include, Steve, anywhere, any place, anytime, U.S. inspectors, not UN inspectors? That would have to be critical. I don't trust the UN. I don't think you do either.
Now, look, the devil, as you know, we've talked about this, the devil will be in the details of the document, and hopefully we'll have that high-quality problem of getting a document drafted. But verification will be the key point that undergirds this agreement if we're fortunate enough to get there. And we're going to have very tight verification. There hasn't been much in the way of verification in the last several years prior to our administration. That's got to change, and if it changes, then we'll have the basis for positive talks. And if it doesn't change, then we'll have to seek alternatives, which will not be good for anybody.
Well, they will be the masters of their own destiny, and we know what that means. They won't have refineries, and they won't have nuclear sites to even talk about if that's the path they choose. I have a very hard time trusting people that believe in a caliphate, convert or die, death to Israel, death to America. But with all that said, I do wish you luck. It would be great for the world, for the Middle East, for peace in general, if it could be resolved with verification. Steve Witkoff, thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.